happened.
Check, check, check.
Okay, hold on. Check, check.
Can you hear us now?
Okay, yeah, yeah.
All
Sorry.
right,
I think
perfect.
I might have adjusted something accidentally.
Um, I did want to say before we get into the real stuff, I hung out with Stephen Markley recently, and he was like,
I
"You're
heard,
gonna
yeah.
talk to Eskor? That's so cool."
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, you guys
Hey,
are like,
actually, I just got to LA about a week ago, so on my to-do list is to make sure that I hang out with him a bit.
"Oh,
So,
very cool, very cool."
yeah, 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 full circle.
Yeah, and he's and Jen Stephen is now in the writers' room for a Dan show, so it's like we're all kind of
Oh
connected.
my
And
gosh,
and
no way.
yeah, Stephen wrote The Deluge, and him and Eskor are old, like writer pals, which is the
Yeah.
way I always dream writers to be, just all like friends with each other and
Yes.
sharing notes.
It is
One
so
big group
crazy.
chat.
Yeah.
We had Rena Mamone over, who's another showrunner who I'd worked with, and her husband is in the room on Dan's new show.
Oh wow.
And so
Okay.
I was
Wow.
like, I feel like every time I turn around, I'm like, oh, there's all these like connections of all these writers who
Yeah.
are working together and friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. Small world.
Yeah.
Well, we have a very unique episode today because we have a co-host,
Yeah.
Taylor, with us. Um, and we have Eskor Johnson here. So where I always start is just to ask the author if you had to describe this book to someone quickly, if they're like, I'm thinking about reading it, but what's it about? What would be your sort of quick pitch to someone?
Oh, okay. So I am very terrible at doing this. Much to the chagrin of like lots of my friends. So if I'm hanging out with friends and someone asks and they hear me doing a horrible job, they tend to jump in and do it. Um, so for a very, what I generally say is it's a larger than life adventure, a modern epic, in which our young hero, young man goes on a quest-like adventure to find the perfect apartment in which to live through a big fictional city.
Yeah.
That's very brief. Like sometimes I ask and it's like 20 minutes and sometimes I ask and
Yeah, well, so I'm like a big, sorry, I'm gonna start to
go.
Yeah.
rip now. Well, I'm the reason I struggle with it because I'm stubborn in doing this is that I my instincts is to kind of intentionally almost downplay how much what the novel is about and how much more I think there is there because I'm a stickler for thinking, the work should speak for itself. Now that has a complication of like, if people aren't excited to go and read the work in the first place, then, you're kind of stuck at square one. But I'm always reticent to kind of, put on a show to be, oh, and it has this and it has that. And even though there are so many things, I just say, hey, man goes on a journey.
Well, and it's really I love that because there's such a like fun irony to that because I feel like the book is so like you said larger than life. It's so there's so it's so colorful. There's so much in it, and yet your like byline is man's in search for an apartment, and it's like, and then in parentheses like, and there's a flood that threatens the whole city, and he joins a gang, and he becomes famous in a way that nobody can relate to. Like it's so rich for having such a like seemingly small like one sentence pitch,
Violent.
which I feel
Yeah.
like does such a cool thing for the story.
Yeah, my intention always is like you wade into the first few pages and like I don't want you to know
Hmm.
the ride that you're about to be on. I remember once I went to this amusement park in London one time years ago, and there was this roller coaster where it was all indoors in like a kind of pyramid structure, so it was all dark. Meaning that you got on this roller coaster and you just didn't know, you like couldn't see beforehand where the loops were, where the turns were. You were
Yeah.
just like strapped in and like maybe you saw like a few feet forward, but then after that it just entered the darkness and whatever happened along the way was always a surprise. Um,
Yeah, that's totally
so
what this book does.
I keep that analogy in mind. It's like, yeah, like I'm not gonna, give you a sense of the
Yeah,
turn. I just want you to kind of be shocked at every one of them.
And even
and
though
the
you
title serves that too. Like where
Oh,
it's a little bit,
totally.
it's vague enough where like you're like, oh, I wonder what this book's about, and then once you finish it, you're like, this is the only title that this book
Yeah.
could have had.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. The title came first, which is not usual for me.
Right. Wow.
But just this notion of I always think of a perpetual motion machine, which is this kind of this theoretically impossible scientific device or a machine that is able it never loses momentum, which violates one of the laws of thermodynamics. Everything will eventually always slow down. But a perpetual motion machine is one that continues to generate its own enough sufficient momentum to always keep going forward,
Right.
which I really enjoy as a narrative concept. Like
Yeah.
you only go so far as it takes to recuperate that energy to go again, to
Yeah.
recuperate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the spirit of pay as you go.
Yeah.
Even though
That's cool.
you put all of us, in a dark room on a roller coaster, what's your process? Like, did you know going in exactly that there was going to be a flood and a gang and you know what I mean? Like, or do you find it as you go, or do you outline? Like, talk me through your process a little bit.
Yeah, the first person on the roller coaster is me.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that by the time I go through it, I know it's safe for everyone else to, So I'm not putting anyone through anything I wouldn't do myself. But no, like it's particularly important for me to not know what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think in the rare times when I was like, much younger, where I would try to like plot out everything that would happen in his story, those tended to like fall flat or kind of go nowhere. Because the characters were kind of like, beholden to the dictates of an invisible God, that being
Mm.
in that sense. Versus, if you want to get all, free will about it. Versus those moments where you as the author, if you don't know what's going to happen and you kind of lead your characters into like problematic situations or dead ends or obstacles per se, then there's really no other way to figure it out other than kind of what's present and what's happening in that real life moment right then and there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Which I find useful for thinking about plot in general, but was particularly useful for this book. So my approach was like, I'm just going to get Slide into some trouble. Hopefully, he's going to figure his way out of it, or something will happen to figure his way out of it. The flood is one of those examples. But it's only when I get there and you really have to lead into the necessity of that moment to figure out what can happen and what should happen next.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like that would be so terrifying I'm a planner. Taylor, are you a planner?
I mean, yeah, like I mean, I write songs, so it's so fun to like hear how different mediums are approached, and that makes total sense with this book. Just the way that it unfolds to me just feels like hearing you describe it that way, like, oh, you really took us on the journey that you seem to have gone on yourself. But yeah, as a when I write, I'm always like, okay, here's the title, here's how I get to verse 3. I mean, it's just such a different thing. So that's really
Mm,
funny. But it's
mm,
cool to hear you say that about like getting Slide into trouble. It reminds me of how like um I'm so willing to go there with him for, 500 plus pages in a way that I might not have been had he been more bitter or even more like socially, how do I want to say it? Like, I think there's something about Slide where he's so preoccupied with getting on his own feet that he
yeah.
doesn't really have time to be outraged I mean, he's pissed, he's complaining, and I love that about him, but there's a charm to it.
Yeah.
It feels a little more like, how am I supposed to deal with this, rather than like the injustice of the planet, and that almost like helps me arrive at those thoughts and considerations rather than Slide kind of like dictating it to me. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm saying that right.
No. I'm so happy to hear you say that because that was part of my journey and part of my experience in kind of putting this novel together was in finding that right balance. So in a much earlier version of things, people would have heard me mention this before, but in a much earlier version of things, there was still a character named Slide, but he was kind of he was older feeling and
Mhm.
like supposed to be like wiser feeling. But then as a result, he fell into some of those pitfalls that you mentioned, where he was kind of like railing against the injustices of the world personally,
Yeah. Yeah.
and was trying to point to grander lessons every step along the way. Uh,
Right.
which I think happens to a lot of kind of like younger author, and I feel as if it's a very like male authorial instinct. Um, is my feeling of things. We like want to be like showing how wise we are.
Right.
Um, but that version of things just it didn't even though it was shorter in length, it felt longer. It was just like a little bit of a drag to kind of endure along the way. So yeah, you're right. I think there is something oddly endearing about Slide, and I think it's just because he's he's like a little bit naive, but he's also quite brave, or
Yeah.
he's a
Very.
yes and type character. So he's just going to lead into whatever the situation is. He'll figure things out like along the way. And as selfish as he can sometimes be, he also like means well. He like wants the
Hmm.
best for everyone around him, as long as he's also getting what's best for
It's
him too.
interesting that you even say that though, because like I would say he was incredibly selfless. Like I felt like every step of the way, yes, he has this goal of what he wants, but like every step of the way, he lets that goal get interrupted to help people around him or
Right.
engage in community in some way.
I think so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the selfishness, I think it's because his central need, it's something so small, right? He
Yeah.
Mm.
like just if you give him four walls and a front door and like a mailbox, like he'll be fine.
Yeah.
And I think because it's so small, it allows a lot of room along the way for him to kind of take others into account and to be more magnanimous in his outlook. Even while he like keeps his eyes on this singular prize, which kind
Yeah.
of takes up the majority of his attention. But it's not a prize that for him to get it, others have to suffer. He like doesn't have to take it from anyone
Right.
per se. It's just
And
his.
it doesn't seem it seems very instinctive with him. He doesn't seem to be like, okay, here's the right thing. I guess I have to do it. It's sort of like, how did I get here? But
Yeah,
okay, I guess I'm helping these people now.
yeah, yeah,
And like
yeah,
that made it even more likable. Like he's doing the right thing, but he doesn't even seem to decide to.
yeah, yeah. He's accidentally moral or like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But he's
Which is
deeply
like,
moral. I mean, that's one of the things I wanted to
yeah,
ask you about because it's
yeah,
like I don't know that I've ever read a character who was as deeply moral without it being preachy. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it was like and also such an interesting moment. Like I'd be curious to know, this is kind of a double question. So I'd be curious to know what your journey was to deciding to write this novel, right? Like I know you were saying maybe there were some previous iterations of it, but like what your journey was to it and was it theme driven, that journey? Because I feel like it's such a relevant thing right now of like we're in a country that is so politically divided, that is so, you know, uh fractured in terms of its perspectives on things.
Yeah.
And yet like Slide really feels kind of like the voice of the majority of the people, even if they would say they were on opposite sides. I feel like people just want, like a roof over their heads. They want to feel safe. They want to be able to afford a good meal. Like he has these very core things that I think are very relatable to like everyone, no matter where you would stand on the
Mhm.
political spectrum. And it's like, it feels like that's the person that gets forgotten in the political conversation all the time
Yeah.
somehow. And
Yeah.
so it feels so relevant to like exactly right now that this book is out. And so I'm just curious, like, was that something stewing in you as you were looking at the political environment from a thematic standpoint?
Yeah, like 100%. Like, I think maybe not of I wasn't necessarily beholden to any one particular political moment or environment, be it the election or lack thereof of various figures. Um, but it was in consideration of the kind of wider political moment in which we find ourselves. I think so much of our conversation has become about um survival and how what room capitalism continues to allow for those of us who are more marginalized or having a harder time survive. It doesn't even have to be marginalized, just having a harder time surviving in this increasingly competitive and unforgiving landscape.
Yeah.
Um, Now that isn't, that wasn't the foremost thought in my mind every time I sat down to write, but it was kind of one of the general considerations in my day-to-day life. And then as far as kind of creating a character that was able to navigate that, I really wanted to come from a very kind of pure place. It's one of the major decisions why I decided to set it in a fictional big city. Long ago, it was going to be in New York, which is one of the major ingredients, but there was something about tying it down to any one place and therefore any one time would kind of take away from what I hoped would be a kind of universality in its message. So I think in keeping those wider concerns in mind, but kind of skirting around the specificities of any one, again, year, time, and place. And just it allowed me to have this character who could just very purely be in conversation with these means of like survival and what it means and finding a space that makes home for you. And have it be a story that hopefully can appeal to whatever time, place, or background someone might come from.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to write, but but I knew that whenever it was done, it'll still be applicable because it doesn't seem as if things are changing in all
Well,
time
and
soon.
how long did it take to write start to finish?
Depending on when you want to count, 4 years, 5 years. So yeah, I think this current draft I started in 2016 after the failed one that I mentioned before, which took me about 2 years.
Oh, wow.
2016 to the end of like maybe like the 2019, mid 2020. So 4 years for that, and then revisions and so on.
Wow. I like what you were saying about the fictionalized city because the fact that I read in an interview somewhere where you were part of your reasoning was like you were just trying to avoid having like geographical experts come knock on your door and like bother you about like, well, that's not actually accurate.
Yeah.
But I mean, beyond that, I felt like it lent even more power to the relationship between the neighborhoods by them being fictionalized. Like rather than me being like, oh, the relationship between Brooklyn and Manhattan is a pretty like nuanced one, and I'm aware of it in certain respects. Like I would just be projecting a lot onto it. Whereas instead, like Petit Julien and Point James and Middleton, like my knowledge of it is only based on this universe that you brought us into. And so that dichotomy is just that much more stark. Like when that drive in the broken windowed limo out of Petit Julien
When you get the Point
James was so effective. Do I have the neighborhood? Am I saying the neighborhood's right? Where he's leaving, but okay. But that part was so like I really like felt like, oh, this is so extreme. Like he was on such a different planet just 20 minutes ago, and the fact that like I feel like I don't know, I maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like in novels, typically if there's some sort of hierarchy or different social structures of different neighborhoods, that's something that the book will tend to want to shine a light on. And with this, there's such a beautiful and realistic like ignorance almost of the disparate worlds. Like there's no like, oh, you can't go over here. I mean, there is a little bit with Calumet in the beginning, and he's kind of helping us get a little sense of the differences in neighborhoods. But the time you're in Point James, there is zero awareness that what's going on just like 20 minutes away is totally so different. Scary and violent and different. And so that felt like, it just felt like this is nailing such a quality of the world that we live in that I feel like books sometimes just can't resist trying to like talk too much about.
Yeah, and also we can't like we can't write it off or can't ignore it because it isn't a real place.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like you can sort of get numb to it if you know those places. You can kind of be like, oh, I know what that is, and you sort of like numb yourself to it. Whereas like you created it in a way where it sort of forces our attention. It put a spotlight on it in a different way.
I
Hmm.
think, and I think because everything is so new to slide as well.
Mm.
So, you like want it, not to get too academic here, but you like kind of want to sometimes imagine that there are always kind of two figures at play on any page that you read, right? There's a protagonist in this case, but then there's the author as well, right? The kind of authorial.
Hmm.
And in that case, the author, I know the lay of the land. I know where everything is. I know the kind of social juxtaposition
Hmm.
and the arguments that can be made thereof when you look at, the wealthy area of Point James versus the rough area of Petit Julienne, and the social commentary that can and should arise from those
Yeah.
different lived circumstances. No one wants to read, I don't think, a book
Yeah.
where the author is just kind of, making all of those points. So what you then have by way of contrast is this character for whom his his scope of vision is just it's much more pinpointed, it's like much more narrow, and it's also all of this is new. So it's that newness and it's that specificity of gaze that just allows us to train our attention on just each relevant detail one by one as they
Mm.
arise, so that you, as now the reader, I guess now this is the third figure, you're able to do a little bit more of that authorial job yourself and make
Yeah.
those cross connections and comparisons. But the book and the protagonist isn't kind of jumping in front of you to do it for you. You're just kind of being guided along by this high beam of a gaze,
Right.
and that allows you to see what has been entirely illuminated by the end.
It's that time. It's that time when I take a little break from the interview and I ask you guys to go like and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. Anytime you like and subscribe, it helps us get to do this again and again, and it helps us get more and more authors interested in coming and sharing their creativity with you. So I'm going to just wait a second. Go do it. Go do it. Go find that little thumbs up. Go find that little subscribe button. Okay. There it is. Okay, cool. Thank you. Truly, I appreciate it. All right, here we go. Back to the interview. Feels
Speaking
very
of the
like.
neighborhood,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, this was just a nerd
We both
question.
love the book so much. We're just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
No,
yeah.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
But this is just like a nerdy question. But there's if you look at the map in the beginning, there's time spent in every zone except for Haverford.
Yeah.
Haverford. So I wondered, like, was there an adventure there? Will there be was that like I was just curious what that place meant to you, considering our boy Sly doesn't make it over there.
Yeah. So for those who probably aren't, I mean, we're quite deep into the conversation already, but just in case for those who are listening aren't aren't privy to what we mean. So
Yeah.
at the beginning of the book there is a map, and the
here, I can
the, the
find it.
city of Polis, it's shaped like there you go. It's shaped like a palm with no thumb.
Yeah,
Okay, so there it is right there up in front of
yeah,
the camera. And then going from left to right are each of the kind of four boroughs or neighborhoods, if you will. And they each have a New York-esque comparison. So there's Point James to the far left, which is kind of like glitzy Manhattan, after which is Middleton, which is like Brooklyn, Petit Julienne, which are like the rougher parts of the Bronx. And then all the way to the right is Haverford, which is kind of like the Hamptons. And then all the rest of the Palm is just general downtown, skyscrapers and bustling commerce. Um, yeah, so he like does briefly stop by Haverford at one point. I think there's this one page scene where there's a garden party and they like go out on the
well, right, right,
boat.
right.
It's
Yeah,
in the
towards
midst
the
of
end. Yeah.
his like Point J. But you are right, there isn't an extended adventure that happens there. This is going to be the most anticlimactic answer I'm going to give. Like I was already like 500 pages into writing this or hundreds of pages. And after a while, I realized, oh, I'm not going to, there's no more room.
I love that.
I was like, this just been going like, it was my intention that we go to all of them, so we made like a stop by. But at one point, I just kind of realized, well, I can't add another section into the story.
That's
What
funny.
might
I
have
do have
happened
an
there? I mean, would
idea.
there have been a hurricane? Would there have been like
I would have thought of something, but
Alien abduction.
any good agent or editor would have kind of stopped me. So I'm glad that we didn't, have to face that problem. Um, I do have an idea. This is breaking news here. I do have an idea
Oh,
for a potential sequel, which I will write
oh,
many, many, many,
cool.
many years from now. This is not something that's happening anytime soon. Um, but
That's
uh,
exciting.
but yeah,
that's
were
really
I to
cool.
do so, we'll get more of
Just
paper.
slide goes to Haverford.
I I feel
The
like, and
final.
I might be like ignorant in asking this question because maybe this is something you have talked about before, but there were two very different references that came to mind to me, like reading this. One was a film reference and one was a book. The film that came to mind was The Bicycle Thief because it had a
Okay.
very similar single goal that this guy needed his bicycle back.
Okay.
Like I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but
I have not, no.
oh my gosh, you have to see this movie having written this book.
Okay.
So it's this really beautiful foreign film that many like great filmmakers will reference, and that's the only reason I knew about it. It was like when I was starting to study film, I was like, "What's this Bicycle Thief,
Mm,
movie?" And it's basically this guy who just needs his bike, and his bike gets stolen early in the movie, and
right.
you are on the edge of your seat trying
Yeah.
to help this guy get his bike back
Amazing.
for whatever it is, almost 2 hours. You know what I mean? Like it's incredible to have such a simple need that like you're like, I mean, my heart's pounding thinking about this poor guy
Yeah, yeah.
trying to get his bicycle back. So anyway, that was the film that it made me think of. But I felt like there was like I don't know, like a brotherhood or a cousinhood a little bit with like Catcher in the Rye, a little bit.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
but not like it was interesting because when I read Catcher in the Rye as a kid, I was like, oh, this guy's such a like amazing like anti-hero, whatever. And then I read it as an adult and I was like, oh, he's like possibly mentally ill. Like
Yeah.
I had two very different
Yeah.
experiences of that, but I don't think Slide is mentally ill at all. But there is like there seems like there's a kinship a little bit with the spirit of that book. Was that something that you were thinking about?
100%. Yeah, yeah. That was I would say, one of the major ingredients. To speak briefly of a film beforehand, and then I will speak Catch and Rye as well. There was another film. It sounds quite similar. Have you heard of or seen A Coffee in Berlin?
No. Oh, I'm so
Okay, so
excited when I get
yeah, yeah.
new
So everyone
things to
should. So
watch.
it's a black and white German film.
Cool.
Yeah, I had a 2 year period where I just watched a lot of movies. And that was one that kind of came up while I was writing the story. But yeah, the like premise is super simple. It starts off with this guy, maybe in his like late 20s or so. I think the opening scene, he like gets fired from his job or something like that, in the morning. And it all takes place in one day. And the very first thing that he wants to do after is just, go and get a cup of coffee. And I think the first spot he goes to, they aren't open yet or something like that. Then the very next spot, the machine's broken. Then something else happened, so on and so on. So like everywhere he goes, he's just getting thwarted and getting this cup of coffee, and gets kind of a lot of these, zany and existential interactions
Yeah.
along the way with various characters. So
Oh,
I
it
love
sounds
that simple
amazing.
premise that kind of kept going simply because the target object kept moving further and further back.
The, when you like, because like yeah, talking about like the different adventures, it reminded me of something I was curious about. Like as Slide's world changes and as he enters into the different adventures, whether it's the flood or Peter Napakakos' gang or Calamet's story, did you find yourself wanting to be a different writer? Like were you kind of like, I'm going to change my approach or my prose or whatever depending on this part I'm in?
Not intentionally, but what happens at the each moment called for it in a different way. And I
Mm-hmm.
just try to follow the pulse or the feel of that moment. So to speak to Calumet's story, quick synopsis. So Slide starts off the story in this apartment that he really hates. He complains the entire time, and he's kind of forced to leave after falling out with his roommate. And what had originally happened then is that after the falling out, he kind of packs his stuff and then just leaves. And now he's out in the world. And when with that original intention, something felt absent, something felt missing. It felt as if there hadn't been enough of a sense of meaning or enough of a sense of a why behind the stepping out
Hmm.
into the world. It felt as if it was just solely being done for him in a way that, again, going back to this notion of selfish versus selfishness, it felt a bit too selfish that, oh, I had a falling out, so I'm going to leave. And then there was this other roommate. So he falls out with one roommate named Eustace, but there's this
Eustace, yeah.
other roommate named Calumet, who had always been this kind of silent, kind of moody, brooding figure.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that, something important, something of substance should happen between these two for
Yeah.
before Slide's journey, either by
Mm.
way of warning or by way of care, by way of, exchange of who they are. And that's where that sequence, so then there's this long sequence following Calumet's story that he's sharing with Slide, and that's primarily in third person, just that stretch there. And again, so that just felt, so that wasn't me saying, oh, I need to write in third person, but it just felt as if
Yeah.
the story that if Calumet is the one speaking, we'll kind of capture it kind of from that almost like a film-like vantage. So the writing does change there. It was also a relief at that point to like, take a little break from Slide's voice. So I wasn't
Yeah.
mad at that choice.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, and it's so cool because like the humor readjusts and like it just like the scene changes in such an effective way. And I was like, I wonder if that's just kind of Calumet taking the microphone and that takes care of itself, or if that's something that was like you had to like carve out. But
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really fascinating.
so okay, I'm gonna pull all of these strands together because we're also talking about books that inspired. So let me kind of speak to that. So another book that was a major ingredient here, is called Texaco by Patrick Chamoiseau. Now, I will also admit, it's only very recently that I've begun to name and mention this book to people. For a very long time, it was like my secret ingredient. Like, no one
Wow.
knows about this book. It is a masterpiece. It's on the level of, 100 Years of Solitude and those classics
Wow.
of world lit, if you will. It's by this Martinican author named Patrick Chamoiseau. And without getting too much into what it's about, one feature that it does have is it's a kind of multi-polyphonic text where you have your main character, but her story is being transcribed by this authorial stand-in who is also in conversation with some of the other characters in the book who sometimes have their own interjections in the form of like notebook entries or of kind of taking over the reins of the narration for a sentence or two. Very cumbersome to explain, but once you kind of get into the rhythm of this book, it's just masterful.
Mhm.
Um, so particularly in Calumet's story, where kind of structurally what is happening is that it's Slide is the one who's ultimately telling this story, kind of in the overall structure of the novel. But for this intervening period, he is relaying to you a story that Calumet told him. But then what happens along the way is that in Slide's kind of capturing of that story, the active storytelling nature of Calumet himself being present in the room or occasionally steps in as well. So Calumet will kind of occasionally also kind of speak in this I first person, and temporarily take the center stage from Slide doing so.
Hmm.
Again, I hope all of this sounds,
No,
I
yeah.
hope it is
No,
less
but this is
complicated
this
that
is exactly
I'm
what we're
making it.
interested in. Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
that's the thing is like, at least for me in general, it's like everyone takes for granted that a book is a book, right? Like it feels like it's this thing that you can, it's like it's so solid. It's the words are on the page, it's all right there, and it's like it's as if it's always existed. And
Yes.
so, and so what I really try to do in these conversations is try to like unpack how much it didn't exist.
Okay.
And you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and that
great
you
phrasing.
made it exist, and that there is that there is this like really hard to define process of like stepping out, bringing something like that into existence, and
Yes.
that like everyone has a different journey. Everyone has a different approach that
Yes.
like, there's people I talk to who have incredibly meticulously planned out things that then all of a sudden like something falls from the sky and then they take a left turn and they
Really?
throw it all out,
Yeah.
or vice versa. So, like to me, that's fascinating because there was such an intentionality in your thought process of, oh, I see this other person using this device, if you want to call it a device, or this
Yeah, for
this
sure.
this way of expressing something. And then now I'm gonna take that device and I'm gonna apply it to my world and then let it all come out as something new. And this is something I'm always fascinated by, especially as a filmmaker, is like I've watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of films, and there's no way I'm not impacted by the shots that I see that I love and
Of
that I
course.
don't, whatever. And even when I intentionally, purposefully rip off a shot, it's still so different than what I
Yeah.
ripped off.
Yes.
And no
Yeah.
one ever goes, oh, that's that shot that's from, like, ever.
Yes.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, no, but it's that
Well,
shot
can't
from,
you see?
like
Yeah.
I can see it. I can
Yeah.
see that it's like an exact ripoff. But there's something so interesting about the fact that you can take this exact inspiration and you filter it through your existence and the
That's that.
millions of decisions that you make. For you,
Yes.
it's every word you choose and the way that you put them together. For me, it's every lens, shot, angle, prop, blah, 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 whatever, and it's like there's something so fascinating about, I think, sharing that with other artists, because I think we all get so afraid of like quote unquote stealing, but the truth is we're all like building on what's come before, and that's so important.
100%. Yeah. No, and you hopefully you want to become a part of that chain of influence, and others kind of build upon what you do as well. But I always say, and that's okay. So now to bring it back full circle, I always say that like I could give you a list of like 7 or 8 books, and if you read them all in a row and then you read mine, to me like everything will be like super obvious.
Right.
I think if you read The Catcher in the Rye, Invisible Man, Texaco, A Hundred Years of Solitude, Speedboat by Renata Adler, um, Invisible Cities by Italo
Oh yeah.
Calvino, a few others I can think of. There are more, but I'm pulling from the major ones, and I could actively recall moments where I'd be stuck and I'd be trying to puzzle something out. And for example, when Sly goes out into the big city and he's trying to get to somewhere to kind of stay for the short term before he meets with his real estate agent. There's a lot of kind of complicated scene work that has to go on there in between showing the new world because he's now downtown, all of this is new, but giving it a sense of narrative urgency. So you want slowing down just to show things off. Um, and I remember like making a table, a similar moment like this happens in Invisible Man with
Right.
Ralph Ellison. And at one point, I made a table in my file where I laid out the beats of what Ellison's protagonist kind of like goes through and does. This page, this page, that, this page,
Wow.
that. And then I just try to kind of cross-reference it against this particular moment in the book, so that I was able to move with the same kind of swiftness of narration without compromising the expository detail, because I had just tried it so many times on my own and I was just struggling. So that Ellison templates just helped in just getting that part done.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and
What
yet
a
and
great
yet your book
solution.
is totally its own thing. I mean, I think about that with music a lot. I feel like if a voice is strong enough and um singular enough, then it doesn't matter how hard we lean on our influences or the things that we love. Like there's certain Neil Young songs where I listen to him, like I think he's just trying to write Bob Dylan, but because he's such a powerhouse, it doesn't matter, and it just still comes out being himself. Or
I would hope so.
reading
Yeah.
that like Henry James just wanted to write Balzac novels. Like he was very supposedly just like very like explicitly clear, like this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
and yet it's its own thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe other people will tell me I'm wrong, but I always, when I hear that sort of thing, I always feel like that's the way. That's like,
I think
'cause
so.
you could just trust your voice, and then everything else will sort itself out, and that's what
Yeah.
happens with your book.
The like voice kind of becomes like the channeling laser beam, or I'm struggling to think of the analogy, but if you think of all the influences being these own beams of light that kind of get concentrated by some object of some sort to form a new singular unified new beam. That in some sense is the voice, right? Whatever
Yeah.
is emitting on the other end does is its own unique contribution, is its own unique beam that could then, beam into any other works that come after. But I think what a good voice does, it is that synthesizing process to make something new. Albeit if you could point to the individual
Yeah.
components that poured into it.
What are you doing now? What's happening? Are you writing something new? Are you teaching? Are you traveling? What's happening?
A little bit of everything, actually. You put your finger on it all. I'm teaching fiction writing workshops. I just wrapped one up with the Sackett Street Writers Workshop, which is a New York-based series of workshops that I've been very happy to be a part of. So if anyone wants to join one of my workshops, there'll be another one
Cool.
in January. I'm working on something new. It's still so new that I'm not yet ready to share what
And
it
please,
is.
yeah, there's no pressure.
But yeah,
I
yeah,
always
yeah.
feel like also it's like I'm always like I don't want to talk about something until it's real and
Until it's real, yeah. So I'm the same way. What I will say is that I'm writing it by hand, which is
Cool.
yeah. So that's
But
been
did you write this by hand or no?
no, 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 no.
Interesting. What prompted that?
Um, well, as I said, that one took me 4 to 5 years to write, and I just don't want to take that long ever again. So what writing by hand kind of helps in doing is that I'm forced to just constantly move forward. I don't have that option as one has on a computer to go back and edit and tinker and make sure everything's kind of like perfect
Mm,
before you kind of move forward. So a lot of what I have written here by hand, I know is not going to be good, but I know there are a lot of good things in there as well. I'm just waiting until I get to a far enough chunk that I'm ready to move it over to the machine and
yeah.
then that
Cool.
tinkering work. So that's been very fun as well. And yeah, and then when I'm kind of bored or when I'm like when I'm writing in the afternoons. So I tend to write, let's say, novel or like prose fiction. I do that in the morning, first thing, just before I got on this call, for example. But then if I do end up writing in the afternoon or the evening, I just finished an essay that I have for Believer magazine that'll be coming out,
Cool.
and I have some film and TV ideas.
Oh,
Cool.
cool.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of everything, but there's this great quote by LeBron James, which I think I mentioned in another interview. It just
Oh,
says,
keep the main thing the main thing.
"The main thing, the main
Yeah.
thing." That's was
That's
very
hard to
helpful
do
for
though. How do
me.
you do that? Like I mean, you say that and I've got like I don't like I have six main things
I
and I'm just
know, I
like
know.
dying all the
I
time.
know. Well, look, listen, if I was just left to my own devices, again, I wake up in the morning and be like, maybe I should work on my pilots. Like maybe I should, launch a business. Or maybe I should. I have a lot of ideas. And I think I've been fortunate in being able to kind of pursue and explore a lot of them. But kind of one thing that has helped me in giving each of them their due is that the number one thing that I think that I'm best at and that I want to, be the best at is writing novels.
Yeah.
So that kind of has to take center stage each and every morning. And should I find the time for anything else along the way, then I'm more than happy to do so, but not insofar as that it comes in the way of the main thing.
I love
Um,
that.
I had a quick question about because I mean I know this book came out towards the end of 2023. How has your relationship with the book changed, and how have you felt like the response to it has changed now that it's been out for like how has the life of the book changed now that it's been out a bit longer?
Yeah, when I'd had writing instructors in the past who, when you're an unpublished author, you ask them questions about, what it's like. And they would always say, you really want to treasure the period before your first book comes out because there isn't anything quite like it and so on. And at the point in time, you're just like, yeah, easy for you to say, you're Pulitzer nominated, like easy
You
line.
have 20 books and yeah.
Yeah. But as with most things in life, you do kind of find that they are correct. Now, what I mean by that is, first things first, it's been a phenomenal experience. It was kind of my life dream to have a book out, and the fact that it's found a readership, I think, has been phenomenal. And it's, conversations like these are, I'm gonna be riding this high for like a week now. Um, but then at the same time, there are lots of like lulls and like dull periods where, after the first month out is the most hype. That's when everybody feels as if everyone in the world is like talking about it. You're getting all these new things. And then that kind of like dies down and it like eventually dawns on you that, oh, I guess I'm gonna have to write another one now. Um, it's not just that, you get to live in that state of excitement forever. I'm not sure if I quite answered your
No,
question.
no,
You did though. I mean, I think that
fascinating.
that's actually a really honest and helpful answer. Like, because I think that it's easy to say like, oh, yeah, it's great, it's amazing, but I think like anything, it's more complicated than that. And I think you're touching on that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think like what Jen was saying earlier about like for us, we only know about it once it's out. Like it's such a clear, defined thing. For you, it was nebulous and living and breathing and changing for
Yeah.
so long. Like I remember hearing this story, and I don't know if it's true or not. I hope it is. But that Malcolm Lowry, when Once Under the Volcano was published at some book signing, he just like out of compulsion, he like took one off the shelf and he started editing again,
Oh, wow.
like because he just like it's just like it's never done, it's never done.
Ah,
And that's I see that with a lot of songwriters because because it's a different medium, you can play with it. Like there's
live
live
performance.
shows where someone changes a verse 20 years later, and I just I'm fascinated by the relationship with the creator and the work itself. Where is it like is it get richer? Does it become something where it's like that represented who I was, not who I am?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I would like,
So what does happen now is like, so during the first few months, when I'm actually holding the
mhm.
book in my hand, I would like reopen it like all the time. I had it like lied to my bed. Like there was almost I just couldn't believe that it was there.
Yeah.
Um, now like that doesn't happen as much. So what will happen every now and then if I reopen my copy, sometimes it feels as if like who wrote this?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it just feel I think particularly when if I'm struggling with the thing that I'm currently working on or anything at all, and I feel as if my language isn't as dull. I'm sorry, my language isn't as bright, it's more dull. And I reopen this completed thing where it's whoever that person was, they pulled it off.
Yeah.
It just starts to feel as if sometimes you're like, am I going to be able to do this again? uh,
Wow.
so the more the time passes, the more you are able to approach it almost as a reader, in a way that I hope will continue to be surprisingly enjoyable as more time goes on. But yeah, like I am very much no longer in that headspace of making it anymore, which is a
Right.
little bit sad because I
Yeah.
do miss writing it. But at the point in time of my writing it, I would have told you I can't wait until it's done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Somehow we have flown through our time. So we're getting to our last question here. And the last question I always ask is just, is there a piece of advice that you've been given along the way? It doesn't have to be about writing, just any piece of advice you've been given along the way that you would share with our listeners that you feel like could just, I don't know, just touch their lives in some way.
Keeping the main thing. That's probably one of the things I say the most.
Yeah.
Um, I would say in any creative endeavor, the first member of the audience is you. And you, more than anything, have to be convinced that what you're doing is worthy of being created and worthy of being shared.
Mm.
Not only are you the first audience, for a long time, you're going to be the only audience member. No one yet knows what you're doing. And if it's your first thing, if it's your first book in this instance, not only does no one know, no one has asked you to do this. You decided to open your computer one day and look at a blank file and be like, I'm going to start typing. And that's a certain amount of delusion that you agree to. And you do need to maintain that delusion
Yeah.
Right.
pretty much every step along the way. Now, the more you make of it and hopefully the better it gets, the more reason you have for that delusion to keep going. But you also have to be aware as to when it is genuinely a delusion, and maybe, you have to ask yourself as the audience member, am I enjoying this? Is this a thing that is indeed good? And if you are not convinced, the chances that others beyond you would be convinced becomes increasingly slim. So sit with yourself in that honest space and, give yourself a bit of that delusion, but give that delusion a reason for being. And then one day when you're ready, step beyond and see if others are willing to indulge you in your delusions as well.
I love it. That's amazing. Taylor, do you have any final questions before?
No, that was a beautiful way to send it off.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you took the time to do this. Really.
Dave, no, I feel the same way.
It's such a spectacular and unique book, and it's been an absolute just delight talking to you about it. I wish we had 2 hours because
and it's been so helpful with trying to figure out what to get people for their birthdays and stuff. I've given this book to so many people. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll say that as a last thing. Hey, it makes a spectacular Christmas gift.
There you go.
Also, listen, if y'all want me to write more, not y'all too, but everyone listening, if y'all want me to write more novels, buy the first one. It does help. Just, spread the word. Spread the word.
Exactly. I know. It's like I finally, my podcast producer was like, "You have got to record a like and subscribe little message."
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like the same thing. She's like, "You've just got to do it. You've got to tell people they need to like and subscribe
Tell
so that you
people,
can keep
listen,
doing the podcast."
if you're listening to this podcast, you are now a part of the team. Okay.
Buy the book, like and subscribe.
If I find you, I'll sign everything. I'll pop by your birthday parties, whatever it is. Buy for your friends, spread the word. I'm not just saying it. It's a good book.
Download Dawes. You guys,
go.
listen, you can have a Christmas party where you give everybody the book. They listen to Dawes music.
Yes.
There we go. Invite me on Zoom. I'll stop by.
Yeah.
Right, I'm channeling the spirit of Slide here, right? It's yes and but yeah, spread it. Let's spread it.
I love it. All right, we will spread the love. Thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you so much.